Another episode of Bullshit and Video Games. We're here with Matthew. Say hi, Matthew.
Hi.
And we're talking about some weapons that he made, some like replica weapons, and he makes them out of like wood and paper mache and stuff, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but they're legit as fuck. The shield that you made for me would legitimately stop an arrow. It's made of solid ass wood and metal, not fucking around.
Yeah, I surely hope so.
Yeah. So you said you made something new. What was it?
No, I'm planning to, but I don't think I have time. Like, I wanted to make a FAL,
Yeah, fall.
and Mauser.
Okay.
But I don't think I have time.
The rifle I saw that you made for that Halloween costume. Mm-hmm. What was that?
That I was intending to make a Springfield, but it turns out the Springfield looks completely different.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know much about guns back then.
That rifle is fucking great.
Thanks.
It's like it's good enough that I would be nervous carrying it around the streets of China. They might be like, that guy's got a gun.
Yeah, I got searched by the police in the metro for this.
I bet you did. I can't believe you took that out on the metro.
Yeah, they basically took the rifle, pulled out the bolt, and okay, that's paper. Oh, never mind.
At least they're cool about it.
Yeah, they're very cool.
Did you ever hear those articles? I remember reading articles last year and the year before that about people getting arrested for fake guns in China. For like airsoft guns and like plastic toy guns.
Really?
Yeah, getting arrested for it. I read an article about a street vendor who was selling plastic guns in the street and she got arrested for it.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. But in my case, it doesn't even shoot, so this is probably why they didn't arrest me.
Those didn't shoot either. I mean, they were just plastic guns. They weren't like airsoft or anything like that.
Okay, then
like plastic children's guns.
Okay, then I got really lucky.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I wonder if they'd come after you for a sword, for a wooden sword. Hey man, it could be dangerous in the right hands.
I don't know. They've been selling wooden swords for decades.
Yeah, true.
That's happy, kind of. This is actually it's kind of has a silver lining in it. One, the bad part is I get arrested. That's pretty bad. I don't want to go into a Chinese prison. But then again, hey, that's a testament to my skill.
Maybe, yeah. You'll be able to put that on your resume. Like, my sword was so good that I went to Chinese prison.
Yeah. Actually, this would help in this line of work. This would totally help.
What was the first piece you ever made?
A musket and a pirate saber.
Okay. You still have those?
Nope. I lost. I still have the musket, but the pirate saber is lost somehow. I don't know where. Yeah, that was pretty fun. I also made a samurai helmet.
Nice. How did it look? Like, was it like the flappy one?
Yep.
Nice. The flappy one. That's the only way I know how to describe the one I'm talking about. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. The flappy samurai helmet with flaps. Flappy flaps.
Yeah, there's this thing. I made a balloon, right? We're supposed to make the mask with balloons as a framework, you know? And mine went wrong, so I improvised.
Okay.
And then I made another mask, which is kind of a demon face.
Yeah, I like those. I like those a lot. Yeah, it must have been terrifying to fight the Japanese.
Yeah, they're fucking like the knights. They're pretty brave, but the Japanese, the samurai, they fucking fight to the last man.
I had this book back in the day. It was called like Ultimate Badass Deathmatch or something like that. Ultimate Badass Last Stands. It was a book that was a whole compilation of epic last stands and heroic last stands. Mm-hmm. And one of them was, I forget who was attacking who, but this big fleet was off the coast of Japan. Mm-hmm. And there was like a local samurai general and his men who just happened to be nearby when this fleet was about to invade. And so they came out to the beach to meet the invading forces. And the people out on the ships saw them on the beach and they stopped the invasion and they thought that they were going to come and parley because these samurai got into these little rowboats and started rowing out toward the ships. And it was just like 2 or 3 little rowboats filled with samurai. And they rowed right up to the like king or emperor or general ship, whatever the lead ship was. They climbed aboard, and nobody shot at them. Nobody tried to kill them or anything like that because they thought they were coming to surrender. Of course, they get into the capital ship and kill everybody.
That's sick, man.
Fight to the death. It's such a good story.
Yeah, well, Last Dance. I know one with a bunch of 20 Sikh guys.
Like 21 Sikhs, in India.
Yeah, the Sikhs guys, they're pretty fucking like badass.
Yes. I can't remember so apparently I remember hearing the story that was in the book as well. And if I'm remembering this correctly, the last Sikh to die was the guy who was operating the signaling device, because there was a light that they were using as a signaling device, and they were using that to signal a British fort that was quite far away. And the British fort was signaling back, and the British fort had a telescope, and so they could see the signaling guy. And the last message he sent was permission to stop signaling and go fight. And they messaged back like, yes, you can go fight. And when they gave that message that he can go fight, he was the last one. And so he like put down the signaling device, took out his gun, put the bayonet on it, turned around, and like when he turned around, the enemy broke down the door, and he basically killed dudes until he ran out of ammo.
Oh shit!
And then killed a couple guys with bayonet, and then he finally died.
Some people are just like, I don't know. This is some culture you grew up with, or that's drilled into you. Mm-hmm. Like, it's the Sikh guys. They're pretty brave, but it's also the Battle of Cameroon.
Super warrior culture.
Yeah, but sometimes those people they're born with this, right? They're basically raised from childhood to believe in this stuff.
To be warriors, yeah.
Yeah, but there's some people who are not. Like some people, they just train. They get drilled into this.
Yes.
Like the French Foreign Legion. With the French, they've invaded Mexico at the time, right? I
didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's the one battle where the French patrol of 60 legionaries, French Foreign Legionaries. They're not even French, by the way.
Yeah, they're French. They're Foreign Legion.
Yeah. Basically, they encountered the Mexican 3,000 men strong Mexican force, and so they retreated into a house. The Mexicans got repeating firearms while the French got the single loader, right? So the Mexicans, they continuously fought the French, and the French just held, and Mexicans suffered 600 casualties for this, and the French Foreign Legions, all but 5 died. The last 5, you know what they did?
What?
They came out the bayonet charge. So the Mexican got so scared, they're like, okay, you know what? We're gonna be nice to you. You just surrender. You just surrender, and you don't even surrender. I allow you to retreat with your colors and your dead commander. Just get away from us. Just get the fuck away from us, man. So yeah, this is kind of a badass you can drill into people.
Yeah.
The mindset, that's what matters.
Also, I think some people are born to do it. Have you ever heard the story of I think a Roman army was fighting a German army in Germany, and there was a little stream, and there was a bridge over the stream, and the armies happened to kind of meet near that stream, and I think the story is some giant German guy was taking up the bridge and holding the bridge by himself for the beginning of the battle for some amount of time, just fighting, because I guess it was only it was a pretty small bridge. You could only walk across it 2 at a time, and just one abnormally large German guy was standing on the bridge by himself, holding the Romans for some amount of time. Shit, I wish I remembered these battles better.
Yeah, let me guess. The guy got taken out from under the bridge.
Probably.
That's not the Romans. That's actually the Vikings against the Saxons.
Oh yeah.
This is what's called the Battle of Stamford Bridge.
Oh shit! You already know it.
Yeah, it's awesome. 1666. It's the Saxons fighting against the Norwegians.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, and
so who was the giant guy?
The Norwegian guy.
Oh, okay.
So he basically took out 40 guys.
Shit.
And the one Saxon guy, he swam under the bridge and basically stabbed him up the balls.
Stabbed him in the dick.
Yeah.
What a bastard.
Yeah, and they won. The Saxons basically won.
Was that the plan? Did someone say go for the dick? And
probably.
And Steve's like, I got it.
If all else fails, the dick is the way to go.
Go for his dick. Go for his giant balls. So wait, who won? The Norwegians lost?
Yep. They forgot to put down their armor, so the Saxons massacred them.
They didn't put on their armored testicle blockers.
Yeah, that too.
So why didn't they just bring lots of giant guys?
I don't know. I think they brought everyone they could,
Yeah.
but apparently people back then weren't that big.
But they were pretty big, right?
I don't know. They didn't.
Probably not as big as Norwegians today.
Yes, I mean Norwegian Saxons. They were both pretty fucking malnourished.
Everyone was in the whole world, right?
Yeah, so they must be pretty small.
But they were legitimately bigger than like Romans, though, right? Because you hear that a lot in historical texts, that the Romans were substantially smaller people than the Germans.
Yeah, and yet they still went out and kicked ass and took names.
Yeah, because they're so much better trained. There's a great podcast by Dan Carlin. Do you know Dan Carlin? He does hardcore history. Yeah. Did you listen to the Celtic genocide one?
Yeah, man.
Mm-hmm. And he's talking about like the things in history that you can't quantify, and one of those things being how well trained the Romans are and how ferocious the Germans were. You know, you have these Germans who are from a warrior culture. They live a much more difficult life than the average Roman. They're like hunters from childhood. They're sort of traveling people as well. They have a deep warrior and spiritual culture, and a lot of them get high on magic mushrooms and go into battle naked. You know?
Yeah, no one mess with those guys.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you compare that to some Roman dude who grew up in the city, drinking wine and eating bread. He's probably soft as shit.
Yeah. Like, also, their weapons are pretty similar to each other. And like, the Romans, yes, had their ballista, but in the open battle, it doesn't really count for much.
What about the pila? I bet that bit made a big difference.
Yeah, but
knocking out shields.
The Celts also had javelins, so it's kind of in weaponry they're pretty equal.
But isn't the point of a javelin to kill the man? The point of the pila is to make him discard his shield, right?
Well, there's also saying that the Gauls may have had better steel than the Romans did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean the weapons comparison was largely pretty similar, and also the Gauls also formed up in shield walls, so it's not like they did every man himself kind of deal.
Okay.
But the discipline was just not the same. Basically, if you're a Gaulish tribe, you're from another tribe, and the chieftain of another tribe orders you around, and just say, "Go fuck yourself. I'm gonna go."
Mm-hmm.
The Romans say, if a centurion from another cohort catches another soldier, and he deserts or goes away or does not do his job, that guy from another unit can just crucify the guy.
Crucifixion.
Yeah.
What a brutal punishment. Or decimation. Brutal.
Yeah. Brawlers would be flogged, looters will be strangled, and deserters will be crucified.
So looters are strangled?
Yep.
To death? Or like just until they...
No, strangled to death.
Damn.
Like the Romans, they're strict on discipline. Also, the Roman guy, there's a thing the Celts and Germans don't do much, which is endurance training.
Mm.
They just run really fast. They have very good strength, but the Romans, they can carry 40 kilograms of military equipment minimum, and march up around 30 kilometers or 30 miles a day. Wow. Those are Romans.
So that was something that Dan Carlin was saying. And I guess he said that Caesar said this in his writing, that the Gauls get tired quickly, and that when you're fighting the Gauls, the battle's decided in the first 10 or 20 minutes, and then after that the Gauls are all exhausted and they're not good warriors anymore. But I bet they're ferocious before that. Yeah.
Basically, you gotta weather the storm after that. Victory is yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with building a good army. Like with Chinese, the Chinese they also had good weapons and good systems, but I don't think pound by pound they can match the Romans because they just don't have the culture for it.
Mm. And what about armor? So I always wonder when I watch historical pieces on ancient China, specifically Three Kingdoms is the only area that I've ever looked into. Mm-hmm. It always seems like their armor is terrible.
Some of them, sure.
Do they ever wear plate armor?
They don't have plate armor, they have laminar armor.
Did they ever have chainmail?
Nope, they never chainmail. They usually.
So if they don't have metal plate and they don't have chainmail, their armor sucks.
Well, maybe. I mean, in Stone Dynasty and other dynasties and later, they actually have very good armor. It's not the weapons that really count. It's basically the leadership and the mentality. There's a Chinese saying like, you don't use good steel to make nails, you don't use good men to make soldiers. So basically, you don't get in the Confucian society. You don't get much respect if you're a soldier. Like you see,
don't use good steel to make nails. You don't use good men to make soldiers.
Like
that's a good saying.
Exactly. In the U.S., for example, if you're a veteran, I mean, you get a lot of respect, right?
Yeah. Sort of.
Traditionally, in China, not so much.
So then, this is a little bit of a digression, but which class got a lot of respect?
I think not class,
because but officers in general got a lot of respect, right?
Sure, but mostly scholars.
Scholars. What about so I've looked into the Three Kingdoms, and they seem to have this like reverence for the tacticians. Was that true?
Maybe. I mean,
before the war, all the different generals like court the tacticians to try to convince them to come over to their side. It's a very they have like a very romantic notion of the strategy of war and like the essence of war.
It makes sense to a certain extent, but remember, these sources come from the romance of the Three Kingdoms, not actually of historical records. The historical records are actually pretty boring, but a lot more accurate.
Wonder what the historical records are.
It just says he did what he did, he did what he did, they did what they did. Not the reason, the intrigue, the Game of Thrones kind of shit.
Was there any Game of Thrones type of shit, or was everyone just like, yeah, I'll just do whatever it is?
Tons. Betrayal. Sometimes, like, one of the warlords called Dong Zhou, he had an adopted son called Lu Bu. Lu Bu is some of the best soldiers, right?
Yeah.
He basically...
Is he the one who's never injured in combat? No.
I think so, right? I don't know.
That's Jiang Fu? Or
Zhou Yun, I think Zhou Yun. Or Zhao Yun, I forgot all the names. I just remember a few. Basically, Lu Bu betrayed Dong Zhou for a girl. That's it.
I think Lu Bu is the one who never got hurt then. He used a sword, right?
No, he used a halberd.
Halberd. Oh, wait. Shit, I cannot remember. So there was the three heroes who always came together. They were like the three brothers. They weren't actually brothers, but they were friends. And one of them was a general, he's a tactician, and the other two were great warriors, right?
Yeah. Liu Bei, Zhang Fei, and Guan Yu.
Okay. And there's Zhuge Liang, right? Zhuge Liang. Who is he?
He's a strategist.
Oh, he's another strategist.
Yeah, Liu Bei is also a warrior. I mean, he is basically the leader, the king, right? And Zhuge Liang is a strategist. His main talent, I mean, he has some tactical talents, but his main talent is just to procure money and to manage men. Basically, have all the armies ready so the generals can use them.
Okay, he's a logistics guy, kind of.
Yeah, the logistic guy. Many people ignore the logistic guy because their jobs are boring.
But it's really important, right? That's why the Romans won so many wars. Logistics. They could actually feed their soldiers.
Yeah, this is because the Romans always kept getting up. Like, the Romans weren't unbeatable on the battlefield. They got kicking their ass many of the times. This is the thing. You just can't win battles 100%. It's not possible. All you can do is to minimize the losses, minimize the strategic losses, and that when you actually lose the battle. Like the earlier Romans, you know why the earlier Romans, they just seem unstoppable in the later Roman army. One defeat, they're completely, totally, royally screwed.
Economics, I would assume. They can't afford to replace the troops.
Also, sure, this too, but also when the replacement troops, they can't actually send to the front because the best troops actually have to defend the emperor.
Oh. Okay.
Otherwise, he gets usurped because Rome wasn't a republic anymore. Like, the position of emperor wasn't like the European monarchies.
So, like, all the Praetorians and all the veterans had to stay home.
Yeah, also, the soldiers weren't the citizen soldiers anymore, and they were like expensive mercenaries or expensive regular soldiers because, the emperor had to buy their troops.
Yeah.
And no one actually dared to lower their wages.
Yeah, I bet.
So they just kept growing. So once you lost them, you can't replace them anymore.
What I always wonder is, we're jumping around topics here, but it's okay. How does credit systems work in ancient times? So if you've got 5,000 men who all take like one piece of silver, every month or some bullshit like that, you can't just give them an IOU. Like they expect that piece of silver in their hand.
Yeah.
Where's that fucking piece of silver? But you have so many people who incur insanity debts. Like, so that a lot of people say that, I should say, Dan Carlin says that that's the reason why Caesar went north and invaded Gaul, is to pay off his debt with slaves. And he incurred an insane debt. But who was loaning money back then?
I'm not very sure, but I think the Roman has some primitive ways of banking. Also, I remember you owing me money. I don't need a paper to prove that.
Well, so what I always wonder is, like, a super rich person, do they actually just have, like, a vault filled with gold pieces?
That too, but also properties, lands, slaves. They're all worth much, and they all basically, if I want to go to borrow money to you, I look at your property. You have a lot of properties. I'm confident in loaning money to you.
Of course, yeah. But I think the point I'm getting at is, like, if you see a big Roman army, does that mean that there's like a wagon filled with gold with that Roman army that's like steadily paying all the troops?
So there's also money coming from the supply lines.
I'd be surprised if they're not robbed consistently.
This is what supply lines, the Romans are really good at defending their supply lines.
Yeah. Shit, if there's a wagon filled with gold, I feel like everybody would be all about that.
Yeah, but then if I steal Roman gold, the Romans are gonna make me pay. So
how do they know who stole it? This is back in the day, man. They don't have facial recognition.
They don't need to know. They just massacre everyone within the vicinity.
They just kill everyone.
Yeah, no one dares to do that.
Anyone with a heavy bag, kill that guy. It might be gold in there.
Actually, I would jump on that. Like,
that's a good plan.
Yeah, that's a good plan. Like, gives me an excuse to steal from people.
Yeah, anyone who looks like they're struggling to carry their bag, kill them.
Yeah, if I'm the officer in charge of this, I'll get rich.
So back to Three Kingdoms. Have you ever watched the YouTube special? There's a YouTube series. They're 1 hour episodes, and there's like a fucking 100 episodes, so I've never watched them, of course. But I've watched probably like 20 hours of it before I couldn't handle it anymore. It's all in subtitles as well. It's all in Chinese. So it's a lot of fucking reading. And, but it's Three Kingdoms, and it's supposed to be very accurate, historically accurate. Supposedly. But the battle scenes in that show depict, like, the strategies that the soldiers use are not believable. The formations that they get into and the strategies that they use are so over the top, it's hard for me to believe.
Yeah.
It feels like it must be bullshit.
Probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It feels like you can't... Sorry to interrupt you, but it feels like you can't do very much more with men that are like in a mosh pit of death than like a shield wall. I think anything more complicated than that, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you gotta make something that's easier to learn, and you can drill into the soldiers again and again and again, so they know what to do when shit goes wrong. Yeah, the stuff they depict, you can't possibly drill it into anything.
There was one episode where in a battle they did something called like turtle formation, where the troops group up into these little blocks of like 360-degree shield wall, and there's so many of these little blocks that they create avenues in between them, and they use this as a counter for cavalry because the cavalry refuse to charge into the spears, and so instead the cavalry, the horses will divert and run down these avenues, and then as they're running down the avenues, pikemen, that Chinese pike with the spear on the front and it has like a hard right angle hook on it? They send these out and they grab the dudes and pull them off their horses and kill them.
You mean the movie called The Red Cliffs, right? Do you see it?
I think that battle is in the show as well. Yeah, I've seen Red Cliff, yeah.
Yeah, if you can, it's impossible to pull it off. If you have a mass cavalry charge in this multiple small lines of one guy, yeah, you can easily charge him through.
They're gonna get obliterated.
Yeah, get obliterated. It's complete bullshit.
Yeah. So I actually completely forgot about Red Cliff. That was just filmed right up the road, right up the river from us, on the Yangtze, right?
Yep.
Have you been to Red Cliff? Been to the site? I went there my first year here.
How is it?
It doesn't look anything like the movie.
That's what everyone who has been there said.
I got there and I was like, this place is not a fortress. Like, I don't understand how this place held off anybody.
Is it small?
It's like, it's not only small, but it's like indefensible. It must have been designed differently, 500 years ago, whenever the Three Kingdoms period was.
Maybe they got the place wrong.
Maybe the place was wrong. Maybe because like the story of the Red Cliff, when they finish the war and they burn all the ships, they talk about there being 100,000 men in the fleet that's trying to invade. And like when you go to Red Cliff and you look off the wall and you look at the Yangtze River, there's just not enough space for ships.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because I think this is why, because the ships can't go through, you can just do the Thermopylae on them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is how they did it.
Maybe because there's fuck all space there. Like maybe you could have one or two or like a handful of ships there, but like in the stories it's supposed to be hundreds of ships because it's 100,000 men.
And also historians like to exaggerate things.
That's an extraordinary exaggeration.
Yeah,
also, why wouldn't they just attack by land? I mean, the place is not defensible.
There's a thing about the Chinese. We have historical recordings of it. Something is relatively less biased. Something is pretty biased. Mostly, but we don't have anything like military dispatches. Those are not propaganda leaflets. Those are military dispatches. Say, I'm an officer, you're an officer. I want this many grain. This is my schedule. This is why I need these equipments at this time. So this is how we know how the sophisticated Romans were. This is how we know how they so quickly, because they are because of the work stuff they actually wrote to each other.
Okay. We don't have that for China? No. For ancient China? Why not? They must have had that information. I mean, you can't run an army without logistics people. Yeah,
I agree, but I don't know. There's not much of this remaining. Most of the stuff we see in Chinese media is about the entertainment stuff part.
Was it destroyed, maybe?
Maybe.
Huh. Maybe it was just considered not important and it was all just destroyed. Maybe the paper was recycled.
Maybe. Like, it's puzzling to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. Why? All right. So this is a question. The Great Wall of China, was it ever useful?
It was useful until the nomads decided to
go around it. Yeah. Well, aside from its propagandistic effects, like, did it ever actually stop an army?
It was a very good lookout system.
So, for example, it could have just been a series of wooden towers.
Yeah, it has a series of stone towers. The Lord of the Rings.
Yes, of course. Yeah. The beacons along the cliffs.
Same deal.
They had the same thing for the Great Wall.
Yeah, they were pretty effective for a time.
But who are they even beaconing to? Like something that always confuses me is why Genghis Khan was so successful against entrenched civilizations that had a track record of being very defensible. So, like, the Chinese are famous for building castles and building walls and all these things. I don't see how horse archers are going to be effective against a walled city.
That's because they're not. The reason is that the Mongols is not just, first of all, there are two reasons why the Mongols were pretty successful. First of all, military structure. They promoted merit, they promoted adaptability. Mm-hmm. Also, they were pretty cruel. And most importantly, they were nomadic people, right? They used to move around in large groups, so they can move faster than most armies. Mm-hmm. But the problem with nomadic people is that they're not very organized or united. So it's kind of easier to beat them piecemeal. But with Genghis Khan, he completely united them, and he learned from other civilizations, more civilized civilizations, that gave them more of a structure, and the social structure is also very suitable for good military conduct.
So back to the Great Wall. I think it was Dan Carlin again who was talking about how a lot of places where it was constructed, it was kind of arbitrary where the wall went down. And so you would be like some villager in northwestern China, and suddenly the government would come through and say there's a wall coming up right here. And then a few years later, the wall would be built, and now you're like, your cousin on the other side of the village is on the other side of the wall now, and they're telling you that he's the enemy because he's on the other side of the wall. And you and your friends have been charged to guard the gate, but nobody ever does because, you know, you have no reason to distrust the people on the other side of the wall. It's totally arbitrary to you from your perspective. And so one of the things I heard is that the places that there were gates in the wall, the gates were just always open because the people who live around the gate, who are charged with defending the wall, have no connection with the central government who built the wall in the first place. And they have no connection with the reason for the wall's existence. And they don't share the distrust of the people living in the area.
I haven't thought about this. This is an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah, and so like now Steve lives on the other side of the wall, and every time Steve wants to come through, you just open the fucking door because it's Steve. You know, you just live the exact same life you were living before, but now there's a wall.
It's probably why the wall didn't always work.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you want to, the wall is not the most important thing. Guys, men, soldiers are the most important thing to defend the empire. And also, how do you manage to use the soldiers to maximum effect if the central government is stable and knows what they're doing with the military? That's the most important thing. And then everything else is circumstantial. So
the wall was never one continuous wall, right? I mean, it was built over hundreds of years.
Well, the wall, it wasn't always used. Most of the time wasn't used. For example, the stuff you see in Beijing, right? It was built 600 years ago, not 2,000 years ago. We don't have much of the
stuff that's 2,000 years old is like a mound of dirt now at this point. It's completely eroded to nothingness. I've seen pictures of it.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so it was never one continuous wall at any point, right?
It was a string. I don't know about that, but mostly a string of fortifications.
Exactly, like a string of walls. So it doesn't sound very effective.
It is effective.
And how many soldiers do you have to pay for to guard this thing?
Not always a lot. You're not always at war with nomadic people. So when your military is pretty fucking strong, you're not really worried about them coming here. Mm-hmm. But in other times where the central government is pretty much eroded, when you don't have any resources and you have droughts and you're fucking bankrupt, the nomads they just stream in.
Sounds like a bad plan.
It's a bad plan when everything else goes bad.
Did China ever invade Mongolia?
Yeah. We actually, the Mongols had a really big city called Karakorum.
I know that from Marco Polo.
Yeah, exactly. The Chinese, the Mongols, they don't use it anymore. The capital is Ulaanbaatar. The Karakorum is uninhabited. You know why? Because the Chinese razed it.
Oh yeah.
Basically, they killed everyone and razed it to the ground.
Was this before or after Genghis Khan?
After.
Okay. Was it like revenge after Genghis Khan?
Kind of. Also because they want to show us. They wanted to make an example.
Of course.
Yeah. So this is how the Chinese basically sacked this area. Yeah, this is the thing with the Chinese. The military, sometimes the military is pretty good, sometimes when it's peace.
What happened before the Three Kingdoms era?
Han Dynasty.
I really don't know anything about China before that.
This is a Han Dynasty. It's basically the longest reigning dynasty in Chinese history.
Okay.
400 years.
Were they very successful? The only dynasty that I'm aware of is the Ming Dynasty.
Ming Dynasty is the last one that's ruled by Han people. Okay. Han Dynasty was her name. They ruled for a long time. They were very successful. A lot of paper was invented. The shipbuilding. We have ships, right? The ships, how we steer the ships. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were invented by the Han Chinese.
Okay.
Han Dynasty.
Rudders. All right.
Rudders. Some like irrigation system invented by the Han. Dynasty. Also paper, like I said. So yeah, it's very, and also poetry. They're very, very into poetry.
Okay. Let me ask you something. What was life like back then for the average person?
Most of them, most Chinese were farmers.
So pretty shit.
Not really. China was some of the richest landfill farmers, so it's not that bad.
Not that bad.
When the government became corrupt and just distributed land to the cronies, the powerful cronies, things got pretty bad. But other than that, I mean, the Chinese had farmers, artisans, traders. Okay. It was fine considering it's the ancient world.
I'd love to know who, like, what ancient civilization / city would give you the best life. Like, let's say you were like upper middle class. You know, you had enough money that you weren't like a serf. You weren't a laborer. Maybe you were like a merchant or something like that. But you're not a traveler. You live full time in a city. What ancient city gave you the best life?
Rome.
Rome
had 1 million people.
Yeah.
Han, like the capital of the Han Dynasty, Luoyang, had 500,000 max, and they're mostly rather homogenous. In Rome, there are all sorts of people, all sorts of food, all sorts of stuff, buildings.
They got lions and shit.
Yeah,
they got elephants in there.
Yeah, you can go to the Colosseum and see all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah, Rome would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, also you get a grain dole. Basically, you don't starve. If you're a Roman citizen, you don't starve.
A grain dole?
Yeah.
So the government just gives you food?
Something like universal basic income.
Jesus. Way ahead of their time, the Romans.
Yeah, I mean...
They're all sitting around like, the machines will take over.
Actually, they had machines sometimes. Like, the Romans had steam machines, but they didn't
use them for power.
This was more of a novelty because they didn't know
the Greeks invented it first.
Yeah, the Greeks, the guy called Heron.
Can't remember his name, but he invented the steam engine fucking 1,000 years before it was used for power.
So they also use the power of rivers, like water power, to power like mills. They don't have to use animals. They don't have to feed the fucking animals or something. They just use mills. They can basically produce food. This way, they can produce food for 1 million people. Yeah, this is just impressive.
In what era would you live in Rome?
You're in the era of the good emperors, like 80 AD to 150 AD. Okay. Yeah, it's a very good time. They were basically ruled by all good emperors. You know why? The same dynasty, all good emperors? Because none of them were actually related to each other. Okay, well, 2 of them were, but the rest of them weren't. Huh.
New people? Is this good for the leadership?
New blood? Yeah, because the first few emperors, none of them had sons. The last one had sons, so his son was pretty shit.
Yeah, I think if you grow up as the son of an emperor, you're not going to be a good person. Is it possible? Is it possible to be good?
Well, it depends. I mean, not in this case. The Commodus, the guy, he was a fucking jock. Yeah.
Basically, Emperor Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber plus Chad.
Chad Bieber?
Yeah, that guy. You imagine that guy running an empire. And he was 17 when he started. I think 17 or 18 when he started.
Does he have the same type of... What's the difference between the power of a Roman emperor and like a European monarch, like the king of...
Roman emperor wasn't really emperor. It's not called imperator. Basically, Roman imperator just means victorious general. I mean, you don't refer to the emperor as imperator. You refer to the emperor as princeps, which basically means first citizen. Okay. Because the Romans, they still had a republican mindset, so they didn't. It's a king, emperor, fuck that. Yeah. So they had this kind of republican mindset. This is why when they transitioned to emperor, blood didn't matter this much. This is why they were in constant civil war.
How much power do you have, though?
A lot of power.
Could you just say off with your head?
They could technically, but the first few emperors didn't just do this. I mean, they were smarter than... They basically let the Senate do some of the stuff. Okay. A lot of the governing, so they just basically maintain the balance between the Senate and...
Just hang out and drink wine all day? Perfect. I want to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd like to live that life a couple of times. Yeah,
basically, not an absolute ruler, but somewhere between a constitution and absolute ruler.
Okay. But the English or French monarch would have way more power.
Not necessarily, because it was a feudal system. The English had all the power. Also, basically, if the English monarch dies, the son or the closest male relative gets to be king, right? And there's nothing else to argue against. I mean, no one argue against.
What's that called, that system?
So yeah, like in the Rome, it doesn't really work this way. This is how the Byzantine Empire was always pretty much unstable because
anybody could be
yeah,
the next leader.
it's a free for all.
What about like the Emperor of Japan? How much power do you have?
Most of the Japanese history, nothing.
Nothing really. Oh, because the shogunate would control everything, right?
Kind of. I mean, at first the emperor had a lot of power. Basically, it said the emperor ruler. That doesn't necessarily mean the ruler of Japan. It's more like a spiritual head of Japan.
Okay.
Like in earlier emperor, back when they technically had power, they had so many spiritual and ceremonial duties that they don't actually have time to get anything done. So this is how many of those emperors they retired, so they let their son do the become emperor and do the ceremonial stuff while they actually run the country behind the scenes.
That's interesting. I was actually, this is a little bit off topic, but you just reminded me when you were talking about ceremony. I was talking to my students the other day about traditions and how many traditions old cultures have. And I was telling them that sometimes I feel lucky to be American and have come from a culture with very few traditions, very little ceremony.
It's convenient. It's very convenient.
It is. It's very convenient.
But I guess, I mean, I'm not a deep philosopher, so I don't really see it, but the philosophers usually say a lot of ceremony means something good.
It's just because it gives them a job.
I guess. Totally.
So, what about living in, like, Edo period Japan?
Edo period Japan?
Would that be pretty sweet?
And there's not much, this is pretty peaceful. Not much economic activity, I mean.
But they're all about, like, wasn't that period of time all about, like, poetry and dancing and love and all that shit?
Yeah, for the upper class.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm assuming, though, I'm not going to be poor when I go back in time. I'm going to go back in time with a big brick of gold. I have a time machine, for fuck's sake.
Sell a time machine or something?
Yeah, I'll sell rides in the time machine. I'll put an ad on Craigslist. Just bring a brick of gold as payment, and I'll drop you off somewhere.
Yeah, that works.
Drop you off with the dinosaurs. Okay, I'll be back. Good luck.
Gotta fucking cut to pieces of fucking samurai.
Yeah, you brought your camera, right? They're gonna love that.
Yeah. I would like... The better choice would be an Animus. You know, the Assassin's Creed thing?
Oh, an Animus, yeah. Like, basically virtual reality.
Yeah.
Have you ever done virtual reality? In real life? Like HTC Vive or anything like that?
No.
I did, or the Oculus Rift is another one. I did HTC Vive for the first time. I did first time virtual reality like 2 weeks ago. It was pretty sweet, dude. I've been avoiding it for years now because I like to take this stance with technology. When something comes out that's really new, I like to avoid it. I don't want to have my first experience be the first technology. I want to wait a couple of years until the technology improves, and I want that to be my first experience. So my first experience was a couple of weeks ago using HTC Vive. It was fucking awesome.
Virtual reality.
Yeah.
So, even when you walked, it's like you walk in the... Basically, you walk and you walk in virtual reality?
No, so... Yes and no. So, we were in a small room in an apartment. And so the first program he had us play, we could walk around in it, but you only walk a couple feet. And then all the programs after that, you stand still and interact with stuff that comes to you.
So you actually walk, like for real?
You could if you had... So they sell these like omnidirectional movement platforms. And if you had one of those, then yeah, you could like run around in the game.
That's fucking awesome, right?
It is awesome.
You can simulate an actual gun battle.
You could simulate anything. Dude, the very first program that he had us do, you put on the HTC Vive and you you open your eyes and it goes from black to white and you're in an elevator going up the side of a building on a construction site. So it's like one of those outdoor elevators. And you immediately get the exact same feeling that you get when you're standing next to a building, like next to a tall place. That feeling that you get like, oh shit, I'm really high up. You immediately get that feeling. It's no bullshit. Even though you know you're just standing in an apartment.
So do you jump?
Okay, let me tell the rest of the story. You get up to the top, and you are high up as fucking hell, man. You're at the top of a giant building, and in front of you there's an I-beam that goes off the side of the building. There's a bunch of birds on it, and the guy who's running the show there, he puts a 2x4 on the ground in front of you, and so you walk across the I-beam. You're walking on the 2x4 off the edge of the building, and then he tells you 3, 2, 1, you jump off, and your character jumps off in the thing, and you just splatter on the ground.
Awesome.
Dude, it's nerve-wracking as fuck. I was legitimately scared.
So it sounds like there's a Ready Player One kind of shit, right?
Dude, we're going that direction. I can't wait. I'm so excited. It's my only reason for living at this point. I just want to see technology. I want to see high quality virtual reality. I want high quality AI, and I want to live to see the AI rebellion, but I don't want to survive it.
Like Matrix kind of shit.
Yeah, like a Terminator kind of shit. I don't want to be one of like the resistance fighters. Nah. I want to be one of the guys like at home playing on his virtual reality, and then like I don't know, the robots kick in the door and shoot me in the head. That's okay. That's okay.
That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, actually, I hope I had a good lunch that day.
Actually, there's the thing. People complain about people sitting on their computers with virtual reality and shit and being couch potatoes, right? Yeah. With the new technology, no one has to be a couch potato because everyone moves, right?
Yeah, but you still won't leave your apartment. Yeah, you'll be moving plenty though.
But then you will not be done by some lazy slob, right? You'll be in shape, pretty much.
Maybe. I don't think you'll be very strong. It's not like you're lifting up heavy things, but you'll be moving around a lot. You'll be walking a lot, probably. I think it'll be used primarily for travel. You know, once you have one of those omnidirectional platforms in your house, you put on the Vive, and then travel companies you're gonna be able to pay like a small amount of money to go visit places. So you're like, I've never been to Greece before, and you can like press a few buttons and probably pay, and then bam, you're in Greece, and you can wander around the entire country in virtual reality.
This would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's coming, man. It's coming in the near future.
But can you have a legitimate workout routine with this?
Nah, fuck that. Just work out in real life. It's so much easier. That shit costs thousands of dollars.
I don't know. It's a multi-purpose machine. Right?
True. So, you watched Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah.
So he used one of the virtual reality programs that's boxing, and he said he got a good exercise doing it. It could be a good exercise. Boxing program. So yeah, I'm sure some people will use it for that.
Box like boxing?
I suppose so. You have to hold the controllers, and so he said it was kind of awkward holding the controllers and boxing with them. But yeah, the controllers are awkward as fuck. Like, I don't know who invented them. They're definitely not a human being. They're not made for a human hand. It doesn't feel like it, at least. They have this big circular touchpad on it instead of a joystick. And the touchpad is idiotic. It's so dumb. It's so low quality. The joystick is so much better. It's superior in every way. Just the other day, I used the touchpad again. I used a Steam controller. Have you ever used a Steam controller? No. Instead of joysticks, they have these two big circular touchpads, and they are fucking worthless. They're absolutely worthless.
You mean the Xbox one?
No, it's a Steam controller.
Oh no, I just used the Xbox ones.
Xbox has the best controller.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. I played Uncharted. I played Uncharted 4 a few months back, and it was a dream. It was awesome.
I like to play a lot of GTA. I wish I had a controller for my computer because driving with the keyboard is a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's GTA 5, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I've never done a single mission. The only thing I do is I go on there, I just drive. Steal a car, drive around for an hour, turn the game off.
Hookers too?
I just usually run them over. I don't have time to stop and talk.
I don't know. Usually you let them blow you and then you steal their money.
I don't have time for that shit. I just go down the sidewalk, hit everybody.
Yeah, this is how Peter Griffin relearned driving cars. He just went to be hookers.
Dude, it's so much fun stealing a motorcycle and going into first person view. So it actually looks like you're driving the motorcycle and driving super fast and like cutting in between cars. It's great.
Must be great.
I honestly think GTA 5 is the best driving experience I've ever had in any game. It's better than standalone driving games.
GTA 5 is the best game Rockstar Games has created besides Red Dead Redemption 2.
I think it's better than Red Dead. I've never been a fan of Red Dead. I think the game's kind of Kind of cheesy, honestly.
You mean 2 or 1?
Both. I've never played the second one, but I presume it's the same as the first one. More the same.
The second one, you had a lot more choices.
Well, so when you say a lot more choices, I felt like the first one had no choices. You know, it's supposed to be an open world Western sandbox, and like I started the game, and the very first thing I did, because this is what I do in sandbox games, I pulled my gun out and I shot the guy standing next to me, and he didn't die. And I was like, okay, well, I guess he doesn't die. And I turned to the next guy in line, I shot him, and he didn't die. And the next guy, I shot him, and it's like, you have a bounty now. And I'm shooting people, and they're not dying. You know, they have like a fucking health bar.
Really?
Yeah. The game upset me. It wasn't. I guess what I was looking for is a degree of realism.
You mean New Vegas kind of realism?
Well, or just like GTA realism, where you shoot somebody and they die. You know, I don't want. This isn't Halo, where we're both trading gunshots, bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I was hoping for. I was just going to go straight outlaw. I just literally kill every single person I see. That's what I do in Fallout. I kill every single person I see. I don't do a single mission. Just kill everybody. I go into a town, kill every single person in the town, loot the whole town, go into the next town, sell the stuff from the first town, and kill everyone there.
Then you're different from me. I just like the storyline of Fallout.
I've never given a shit about the storyline. Fallout 3 with the water purification, that was pretty good. It's shit ending, of course, but pretty good storyline. I like the idea. It makes sense to try.
Multiple endings. Which one do you mean?
They only had one real ending with Fallout 3.
Yeah.
With the water purification?
You have one you side with the Brotherhood, one you side with the Enclave.
But no matter who you side with, you get stuck inside of the room at the end and die.
No, with the Broken Steel DLC, it's different.
Okay, well, with the Broken Steel DLC, it's different. But with the actual base game, no matter what you do, you just get stuck inside that room and die.
Yeah, you only get to level 20. Of course, I'm not gonna just play the base game.
Yeah, that game is so dumb. The game is good. The ending is so dumb.
After the DLC, it's different.
You can have multiple companions who are immune to radiation, and they won't go in there and flick the button.
I did this. Actually, in the DLC, I used another companion to do it.
Of course, because it's a DLC. They fixed the obvious problem, but it should never have been there in the first place.
There's one thing I like about Bethesda, because they actually let you mod stuff, and they learn from the mods.
To a degree.
Not with 75, not with 76.
Yeah, 76. They lean on the mods too much now. I mean, Fallout 4 is unplayable without mods. Again, I say this all the time. I've never played Fallout 4, but at this point I've watched so much material on the game, and I've done so much research on what mods people use, and I've done so much research on the glitches in the game and the bugs. I honestly think it's unplayable without being fixed by mods.
I'm playing right now. It's actually pretty fun.
Do you have mods in it at all?
No, I had
Well, I guarantee you your experience will be better with mods.
I guess. I always wanted some better rifles.
No, I'm talking about they have, I think it's called the unofficial Fallout 4 mod, and the whole mod is just fixing glitches in the game. It fixes like tens of thousands of glitches.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So how do you get it?
It's probably on ModDB or Nexus mods. But
can you write me the name later?
I'll send a message to you. But there's all these YouTube videos that go through like listing all of the required mods to play Fallout 4 without having constant crashes or having constant problems or just having stupid limitations in the game. Oh, pardon me.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Like, it's basically, I heard about this mod. You can even kill kids, right?
Probably, yeah. That sounds familiar. There's a lot of things that Bethesda does in their games recently that seems like pointless. I don't know. They think
the Fallout franchise is dying, so they just want to make the most money out of it. I think.
Yeah, kind of loot its corpse and then abandon it.
Yeah, the fucking assholes. They should have given the Fallout 4 platform to Obsidian and let them make a story out of it.
Oh, Obsidian fell apart, didn't it?
No, it still goes.
I thought the studio.
No, they have a new game called
Disintegrated.
The Outer World. No, they still exist. They have a new game called The Outer World.
Huh.
This is also a kind of like Fallout-like futuristic.
But it's not the same people who worked on New Vegas, right?
I think that some will still remain.
Huh. Yeah, in that case, then they need to be making all of Bethesda's games.
I think they should reboot the post-apocalypse franchise. You have a Fallout, it's the same kind of Fallout game, but then you can have it's twice as the map is twice as big. You have a kind of, instead of a 50s culture, you have a 2019 culture. For example, there's after an EMP attack, then we have say World War III, but at the same time we have an EMP attack, so everything is fucked up. And after 100 years, new society around say southern, like western, like around Texas and Colorado or something like this, then the new societies form and you have to build up. And the culture is kind of like 2019 culture.
Yeah.
And you have armored cars, Humvees, and helicopters.
And you can actually use them in the game?
Yeah, basically
they'd have to be repaired, obviously.
Yeah, you have to repair, but you can command them through a computer pad. You get the skills I learned from veterans.
So talking about, I think that's a good idea. Talking about EMPs, do you know the sun has solar flares that launch EMPs?
Actually, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, and they launch them. They have very, very serious ones about once every 100 years. Mm-hmm. And apparently there was one in the late 1800s that hit the earth that was so powerful that it lit telegraph operators on fire. It was such a powerful EMP. And so if one of those hit the earth today, it would be devastating. We would be back to the dark ages. Like that.
This is perfect. And then you can actually face first the EMP attack, basically to destroy civilization, right? Then,
why do you think our society, this is a bit of a digression, but why do you think our societies are so fragile? Why are so many obvious weaknesses not addressed?
Because we are we're comfort driven people, right? We want comfort, and this is why we increasingly rely on stuff that we can't do with our own hands.
Well, I mean, EMP proofing electronics isn't actually that difficult. It's pretty simple process. It's laborious though, and so it would take years and a lot of money to go through a society's infrastructure and EMP proof all the electronics, all the important stuff like all the transformers and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
all it takes is a Faraday cage and it will stop an EMP.
I think there's so many problems in the world, like, for example, in America alone, that's pretty immediate and we should address right now, and no one does.
No one does.
Like, we just think about something about PETA, feminism, or something like Israel, or something like that.
Some stupid tweet from Donald Trump. Yeah,
who fucking cares? We have a debt crisis, we have an overblown military, we have a war all the time, we have an EMP to worry about, we have natural disasters. Who the fuck cares about feminism or any of these other stuff I just mentioned?
A meteor could come out of nowhere tomorrow and obliterate us. I forget who it was. It might have been Neil deGrasse Tyson. Somebody asked him how much warning we would have if a meteor was coming to Earth, and he was I forget exactly what his answer was, but basically none. He's like, you wouldn't get enough warning to do anything about it.
So we're basically fucked.
Yeah, because like they're pretty much invisible meteors. Like you have to kind of find them accidentally. It sounds like. So
yeah, this is if a more advanced civilization has existed before us, this is probably what happened to them.
Yeah, and if they got past the stage that we're at, they got past it because they became a multi-planet species, or they just started living in space stations, which I think is a better idea. That's why, if I was ruler of the world, I would dedicate a large percentage of the global production chain to just building space stations and putting people in space.
Yeah, so many immediate problems. No one actually bothers to solve them because most people are just too ignorant, and the ones who are. Who know about this, they think they can just. I have enough money. I can just take care of myself. Themselves. I don't fucking care.
What about all the space debris? Apparently, there's so much space debris now that when they launch a new satellite, they have to look for an opening in the trash and launch the new satellite through that opening.
I still don't understand.
So, because we've been going to space for so long now, and we've just been dumping garbage up there, and like the old satellites and rocket parts and stuff like that, all that stuff's orbiting around the Earth. As well as there was a collision between an American and Russian satellite back in the day, and only a few years ago, the Chinese wanted to test some missile, and so they used it against one of their own satellites. They missiled one of their own satellites, and these two destructions, the collision between the American and Russian one and the missile test from the Chinese, created hundreds of thousands of pieces of trash. And when pieces of trash collide, they break into more pieces of trash. And so right now there's millions, and NASA actually has a website you can go to and you can see, because they track them. They track every single piece. And these pieces, because they're in space, they're always gaining speed. They're always accelerating. And so these little pieces of trash are moving at 100,000 miles an hour, orbiting around Earth. And it doesn't matter if it's just a little nut or a bolt or a little piece of paint or a piece of glass or something. Moving at 100,000 miles an hour will completely destroy a spaceship. You can't send spaceships up with armor on them because they're too heavy. And so you have to find, there's so much trash now orbiting the Earth. When they launch a new satellite, they actually have to look for an opening in the trash and launch it through the opening.
Wow.
Yeah. And so a lot of people online, a lot of quote-unquote experts, and legitimate experts like Neil deGrasse Tyson. When I say quote-unquote, I mean like people making YouTube videos, like just some random dude. But it's not bullshit. They're talking about how this could be one of the great filters that keeps civilizations on their home planet if they just create so much trash in their atmosphere that they can't leave. That, launching a satellite, launching a spaceship would be suicide.
It's pretty problematic.
It's a big fucking problem, yeah.
Hey, speaking of space, like this, I heard people saying that, they're traveling to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people say, like, we could travel to the moon before, but we can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't know, we lost the technology or something?
Yeah, there's a famous video of a NASA scientist saying those exact words, that we lost the technology and then we can't go there anymore. No, I don't.
So do you think we ever landed on the moon?
I think that we probably did. I don't really care, and so I haven't really looked into it. Here's the problem with going to the moon: there's just absolutely no utility to it. And if you're asking me, do we have the technology to go to the moon? Yeah, I think we have had that technology for a very, very long time. Do we have any reason to go to the moon? No, we never have, and pretty much we almost never will. There's very, very few reasons to go to the moon.
What about tourism?
But that would imply that the people can either spend a ludicrous amount of money or you've made moon travel very, very cheap.
Yeah, okay, we don't have technology for that.
No. One of the reasons to go to the moon would be for helium-3, which is apparently a very good fusion fuel. I've heard that from Isaac Arthur's channel, so if I'm misquoting him, sorry about that. Everyone listening, you can go listen to it yourself. But the sun creates something called solar wind, and this solar wind has helium-3 in it, and so the solar wind is going out in all directions, and it strikes planetary bodies, but our atmosphere keeps it from hitting the ground. Because the moon has no atmosphere, it deposits on the surface of the moon. So the surface of the moon has shitloads of this material, and if we ever create sustained fusion, like cold fusion, low mass fusion, that would be our number one fuel source. It would probably be the number one fuel source that we would use. So, like, if we invented cold fusion tomorrow, every nation on Earth would be scrambling to get to the moon as quickly as possible.
That would be a reason to go to the moon.
Yeah, but that requires first that we have fusion power, and there's no guarantee that we'll ever have fusion.
This is interesting. But what do you think about Mars?
I like the idea of the human race becoming a 2-planet species, but I prefer the idea of the human race just living in space stations, because I think that's the inevitable end goal. I honestly think if the human race doesn't destroy themselves, 1,000 years from now, we're going to look back on today, and human beings are not going to be able to understand why we cared about the Earth. They're not going to be able to empathize. They're not going to be able to feel that same care. Because I think 1,000 years from now, 99.999% of people are going to be living in a rotating habitat floating through space. A man-made space station habitat. and they're gonna look out the window and see planets like the Earth, and they're gonna be like, I don't understand, why did anyone live in that shithole right there with a gravity well and with earthquakes and fucking volcanoes and shit, and you can't even move. What if you get hit by an asteroid? They're not gonna understand. Just the same way that our civilization today can't understand living in a cave. I can Google pictures of a cave right now, and we can both sit here and look at the cave, and we can imagine living in a cave, but neither of us can really empathize. Like, why the fuck did anyone live in caves? What, at some point in history, people valued a cave.
Oh yeah, back in the day, different time, different situations. Exactly.
And so I like the idea of going to Mars, but I like the idea of just living in space more. And going to Mars is probably more economically feasible because, like, you don't have to build the habitat. Well, you actually do have to build a habitat, but I don't know.
What does Elon Musk say?
He thinks that we'll be there like within the next 10 years. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, I think he's just hyping.
Yeah, I agree.
But then again, he hyped before and it turned out to be true.
Well, I also just think that this is a brute force task. And so I think we could get there in the next 10 years if Elon Musk had 100 times more money than he has now. And he had 100 times more support.
This is why he works with the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Actually, he does it cheaper than the U.S. government would have. So.
Well, everybody does things cheaper than the U.S. government. The U.S. government is it's their greatest talent is spending money. But I think that you should listen to the YouTube channel Isaac Arthur. Yeah, I'll send him in a WeChat message as well. I think he's the greatest science educator I've ever come across in my life. And one of the reasons I love him so much is because he makes me very optimistic about the future of humanity. Because he makes it absolutely crystal clear when he's talking about something, if what he's talking about is just theoretical or if what he's talking about is plausible by contemporary science. And so what I've come to learn through his education is that most of the things that we consider science fiction can be done with our current technology. It's just in a huge brute force problem. We could have millions of people living on Mars today if we wanted to. It would just require the entire world's effort. It would require a huge percentage of global GDP. But we could do it. Like, there's nothing stopping us technology-wise. It would be an impractical commitment.
Can you say the U.S. do it alone?
On a very small scale, probably, yeah. But it feels like something, if you're going to do it on a big scale.
It's always useful to do it experimentally, like build up a small space county.
I agree, yeah. And that's how we're going to have to start. But the goal of having people on Mars is not just to have a colony, it's to have a second home, a second Earth, a second civilization.
Just in case the first one just gets obliterated.
Yeah, and it could. At any moment, we could just get obliterated. Yellowstone National Park is a supervolcano. And it's past due. It hasn't exploded in, I think 700,000 years, and it's supposed to explode, every 500,000. Give or take a couple 100,000 years. So it could be a couple 100,000 more years until it explodes, or it could explode tomorrow. And the last time it exploded, and every time before that it exploded, it obliterated the North American continent. I mean, everything is destroyed. We're talking about a volcano that's hundreds of square miles. While I was actually living in Montana, it got bigger and bigger. As the scientists studied it more and more. I was there for 4.5 years. And from the time I arrived to the time I left, the size of the caldera is the name of the supervolcano, the magma pocket, the size of the caldera grew twice while I was there. It didn't actually grow. The scientists just found lava in new places. And so their estimation of how big it is kept getting bigger and bigger.
Holy shit, you're sitting on a time bomb here.
You literally are sitting on a time bomb. That's right. And the Earth on the Yellowstone National Park, the Earth is actually rising up. It rises up a little bit every year. It's like a balloon filling and explode. Real. And
do they have a plan?
There's no plan. What are you gonna do?
I mean, the whole continent's gonna be fucked.
Well, so when they look at geological records, what they see is that when this goes off, it usually causes a worldwide winter. it blacks out the sky for a year or two, which kills, of course, all vegetation. And when all vegetation dies, all animals die. And so it's like a hard reset of the planet. And so when it explodes, like all of Northwest America and like Southeast or Southwest Canada is going to be destroyed from the explosion. And then the rest of the world is going to go into like a apocalyptic winter where the sun goes away for a couple of years and everyone dies.
You know, if the US just dies, it just goes away. I mean, the whole world's going to have a lot.
Going to follow it.
Yeah, they're going to have a lot to adjust to.
Yeah. Imagine if the whole world can't grow food for 2 years. That's it. It's game over.
So, billions will die.
Yeah. Almost everybody will die. Anyone who doesn't have 2 years of food in their closet is dead. So in that circumstance, you don't just want a colony on Mars. You want enough people. You want a whole other civilization. A civilization that isn't helpless. They can see that happen on Earth, and they can start making preparations.
That would be interesting, but yeah, if this ever happens, it's probably going to be mostly in Western countries.
Yeah, it would have to be countries with the infrastructure to support space travel.
So like Western, like US, maybe China, Japan, definitely Korea,
Canada, England, France, Germany.
Yeah, they're going to be fine, but the rest
Russia.
of the country, they're pretty much going to be fucked.
Well, they're just not going to. They'll be involved in other capacities, probably. That's sort of how it is now. A lot of people are involved in the ISS that don't necessarily have robust space programs. But they'll still send a scientist up there or two. Or they'll support with money, or they'll support with equipment or something like that. There's a lot of programs that are being shared by countries. Like there's an international program trying to crack fusion, and that's actually supported by like 20 different countries. And they designed the program in such a way where no one country has the ability to benefit when the other countries don't. And so the way they did that is they're trying to build this fusion reactor, this giant fusion reactor, and they made it so that every country has to create their own part for the reactor, and that part is proprietary to that country. And so if the technology is successful, every country will have to work with the other countries in order for each country to have a working reactor.
This is a way to secure like a cooperations, I guess.
It is. I mean, again, I think that Isaac Arthur's videos on fusion will absolutely change the way you think about energy. Almost every problem that you can point to in humanity right now, every societal problem, can lead back to energy. The only reason we have hungry people on the planet is energy. Insufficient energy. The only reason we have thirsty people, the only reason we don't have enough clean water, energy. All these things, energy.
I think people, like you said, you should, like you said before, you should focus on thorium first and solar energy later.
Yeah, I agree. Or fusion if we got it. And this is all coming from Isaac Arthur again.
It's kind of tragic. I mean, thorium. I mean, how difficult is it to build a thorium reactor?
I don't know. I've only watched a few documentaries on thorium on people discussing their reactors. It's probably just as difficult as a normal reactor, but it's apparently it's very difficult for the videos I watched at least made it sound like it's impossible for a thorium reactor to melt down.
So it's a lot less likely that we are going to be blown to pieces.
The way I heard it described is that in order to make thorium fission, it has to be under a lot of pressure, and it has to be under a lot of very complex circumstances. And what happens when, like, let's say you have a disaster like Fukushima or like Chernobyl where the power goes out, and in a uranium reactor, when the power goes out, the systems that keep it from fissioning out of control, they're not working anymore, so it fissions out of control. Whereas when the power goes out in a thorium reactor, the components that are making it fission stop making it fission, and then it just fizzles out.
I mean, in a century, most countries can make thorium reactors, right?
They could today. I mean, I'm 100% sure that the technology is not protected.
One has access to it.
I would say so. Yeah, it's pretty old technology. Again, according to the documentaries I've watched, which are just YouTube documentaries.
So every country in the world can just build them, so they don't really lack for taking energy anymore. They don't lack for electricity.
It sounds like they could if they were willing to make the investment. I'm sure it's expensive as fuck.
That's probably why only China does it, right?
Well, also, you can't make nuclear bombs with thorium. You have to make a uranium reactor to get the 235.
So you said the only country is mainland China who does it.
No, other countries do it as well. I think that China builds the most thorium reactors. Again, this is according to a documentary I watched by a guy who claimed to be a nuclear power expert, and the documentary was him going around the world giving conference talks trying to convince people to stop using uranium reactors and start using thorium reactors. And he would say in the conference repeatedly that the Chinese understand the value in uranium or thorium reactors, and so they're building them more than anyone else in the world.
Well, this is a good thing about China being a dictator and being an authoritarian government. Basically, the one guy has the right choice, they all do it.
Yeah. When someone says something, it gets done. That is a big difference.
Yeah, like in the United States, do they use thorium?
No, they use uranium. I don't know, man. It's incredibly dumb.
Corporate interest, people sell uranium, they pay the Congress.
Probably, and the depleted uranium goes into has military uses. It's extremely dense, so it makes great munitions. They use depleted uranium for bullets and projectiles.
The sixes?
They use it for the 50 BMG, and they use it for the tank shells for the M1 Abrams, the Sabo rounds. The depleted uranium or the tungsten.
This is why they can get it readily available.
Probably. Well, uranium is extremely inefficient. Like the vast majority of the uranium that goes into the reactor comes out as waste. So whereas the thorium is almost 100% efficient.
So the waste, you can use the waste to make bullets?
It's just extremely dense material. So a super high density material makes great bullets.
Awesome.
Armor, probably not. Because I think it's brittle. I think it's very brittle. Probably don't want to make. Also, conventional armor doesn't work anymore. All the armor that works today is reactive. Have you ever seen videos of that? Reactive armor?
They explode
the
opposite direction.
How fucking crazy of an idea is that? Like, there are videos there on YouTube of an RPG rocket coming in, and the moment it touches the armor explodes, destroying the rocket.
Yeah, this is what the Abrams is so hard to take down, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah. But there's multiple types of reactive armor. Have you seen the shit? I can't remember. Do you know what a shape charge is? Shape charge is what an RPG uses to penetrate armor. A shape charge is usually copper. Imagine like a cone, like an ice cream cone of copper. Mm-hmm. And the opening of the cone is facing forward. Mm-hmm. And so the point is facing back. And imagine that you put this cone inside of a cylinder. Mm-hmm. And this empty space behind the cone is filled with explosive. Mm-hmm. And so when it hits a target, that explosive goes off. And because of the shape of the cone, it creates a funnel that pushes a spike of superheated copper through. Are you following me so far? Yeah. So imagine the ice cream cone inverting into a spike. And this superheated spike of copper cuts right through armor. And
the explosives get in.
Yeah, and the explosive comes in behind it and blows up on the inside.
Oh yeah, I saw it in this documentary called Lock and Load with Arman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Arlie is the best.
Yeah, rest in peace, guy.
So there's this, I think he's Scottish, this Scottish scientist who started to make shape charges using water. And they're extremely powerful. And I watched a documentary. It was probably like Future Weapons, some TV show like that, actually. And he uses it to fuck up a car.
They fuck up a car, come on.
But they put a bunch of IEDs, like dud artillery shells in the back of the car. The point is, though, that this thing is just plastic and water. It's like an extremely cheap explosive. And it's extremely effective. It's just as effective as like the copper and metal ones.
Yeah, the U.S. Any military can save billions with it.
Yeah, probably. Okay. This is a little bit of a digression, but that seems to be what this podcast is. Honestly, just a series of digressions.
Not digressions. I love the digressions. I mean, Joe Rogan, his podcast is also about digressions.
Yeah, it's great. Something that Isaac Arthur talks about all the time is if you get an object moving at a high enough velocity, it doesn't actually matter that you have explosives on the inside. And what he calls this is a relativistic kill missile. And so if you have a civilization that's advanced enough to travel between stars, between galaxies and such, there's no explosive that they can use that's more powerful than just dropping an object out of their spaceship as they fly by. If you fly by the Earth at 10% of the speed of light, you can just drop a piece of garbage out the window of your spaceship, and it will strike the Earth with more force than an atomic bomb. More force than the equal weight of mass fusion exploding, because it's moving at such an insane speed. And scientists weren't aware of this at the time, apparently, but they actually had this level of technology in World War II with the V-2 rocket. When the V-2 rocket hit the Earth, it was moving at extraordinary speed, like a couple miles per second. And it was packed with TNT. But if the German scientists at the time were aware of, if they were more aware of the physics involved, they wouldn't have packed it with TNT. Because the weight of the rocket moving at such speed, hitting the ground, actually delivers way more force, just pure force, than the TNT that was inside the payload.
This is one like later like high velocity cannonballs they just hit, and they can actually create like debris. Actually hurts soldiers nearby.
Yeah.
Because of the speed.
The splintering. Yeah.
Not just as like the Earth they kick around can also hurt people.
Oh yeah, definitely, and they bounce.
So basically high speed makes all the difference.
Yeah, and so like, it's really interesting. When I didn't know this, I used to think that cannon shells explode. They don't. Modern cannon shells, it's just a spike. Yeah, the M1 Abrams fires a sabot round. It's just it's either tungsten or depleted uranium, but both extremely high density, so they're really, really heavy, very massive, and it's just a fucking spike. And it's inside of a what are those called? It's inside of like a carriage that holds it to the shape of the tube, and then when it comes out of the tube, the carriage falls away. You know what I'm talking about?
The carriage on top of the tank.
No. So there's like an object that holds the spike, and you load this object into the tube, and then when you fire the gun, it comes out the end of the tube, and the object falls away, and the spike carries on because the spike isn't the shape of the tube, and so this object holds it in shape so that it catches all the force. Anyway.
Wow, this is actually pretty impressive.
It's upsetting me that I can't remember the name of the object. It's a very old technology. But anyway, so modern tanks like the M1 Abrams, they don't fire an explosive shell. It's just a spike moving at insane fucking speed.
They used to carry explosive shells.
Yeah, like World War II. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw those ones in military museums. I sent you the pictures, right? Those. It's basically a cast iron projectile with a hollow part in it, where they carry the rounds, and the tip is basically explosive, like basically a charger, and the target, and then the whole like shell explodes, splinters.
Yeah. World War II was an interesting war because like technology sort of met human ability, and it's probably gonna be the last time in history where technology didn't just dominate the battlefield. Like human ingenuity and human bravery and human ability could, triumph to a degree. You know what I mean?
No, not so much anymore.
Not so much anymore, no. And not so much before that either. World War One, there was no such thing as bravery. Bravery didn't get you anything in World War One.
No, you needed tactics,
but there were no tactics in World War One. I mean, for the most part.
I disagree. For example, in World War II, right, the Germans took over the French, like
that,
like in weeks. But you know what? The French actually had heavier tanks. They had better rifles. They're just as good rifles. They have very good fighter squadrons, and they have a good navy, but actually better navy than the Germans did. So. The difference with the French is that the French just weren't as well trained. The Germans, they drilled in large-scale armored warfare for a decade. And the French basically it's basically a corrupt institutions where basically your office because of political favors.
Yeah.
So the French command structure, which is shit, and the German command structures for their time, they were tactically, operationally, they were second to none.
But we were talking about the tactics in World War One. There's a great YouTube channel called The Great War. You gotta check it out. And watching that has made me appreciate World War One. I actually appreciate it more than World War Two now. I think it was a more important war, and in a lot of ways, it was much more extraordinary.
It caused all the problems that we have today.
Yes, absolutely. And what you learn when you study World War One is that there was tactical advancement, but the cost that it came at was ludicrous. And we're talking about months and months of banging your head against the wall to make tiny improvements.
Adaptability. This is the problem with most European armies back then. They weren't very adaptable.
Yeah.
Until, you know what? We lost like 1 million men. Maybe we should start adapting.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah, we're going to attack straight into their lines every day for 6 months and then change our tactics slightly.
Yeah, it's kind of a sentimental slaughter, at the Somme, like the British lost like 400,000 guys, so did the Germans. And then all this for, 3 kilometers?
For nothing, basically. Yeah, I think that it's unfortunate that some people kind of trivialize World War One as being like a meaninglessly barbaric, and so therefore it was meaningless. It was much more important than World War Two.
It was meaninglessly barbaric, but it wasn't meaningless. Far from it.
Exactly. It was geopolitically, it was probably more important than World War Two.
I mean, if World War One didn't happen, World War Two wouldn't happen. For example, like the post-war order that people like Woodrow Wilson created that actually led to World War One. For example, the Japanese were pretty pissed off after the settlement. The Germans were pretty pissed off after the settlement. Hitler rose after this. I mean, Hitler wouldn't have been able to join the German military if the war didn't happen. Or
if that British guy shot him.
Yeah. Or, the Balfour Declaration?
What?
Balfour Declaration.
No.
It's basically, the British wanted to fight the Turks, the Ottomans, right? They wanted, because the Ottomans sided with the Germans. So they wanted to wrestle like the Middle East, Mesopotamia, all this kind of places from the Ottomans. So what do? They employ some Arab tribes, not all. I mean, many Arabs were loyal to the Turks, but some Arab tribes they were to side with the British and their government. Their dynasties later ruled Middle East. Some were overthrown, some still exist today. Anyway, those guys. They were promised all this land, right? They wrestled from the Turks if they helped the British win against the Turks. Because the Arabs did a lot of the fighting, actually. So, the British says, you know what? But the British did some really big moves. Basically, say, I'm promised to some Jewish guys from Europe. And I also promised to you, and I also promised to myself. The British and French both did it. And they ended up owning this place. And once they left, they basically left the whole region into a mess. All the country thinking, okay, you're not supposed to be here, you're not supposed to be here, you're not supposed to be here, and the conflict spills off. I mean, it still exists today.
Yeah, of course. Entire countries didn't exist before World War One.
So exactly, I mean,
it's pretty amazing.
World War One was just as important, if not more important, than World War Two, to be perfectly honest.
I'd say more. You should really check out The Great War on YouTube. It's fucking fantastic.
Yeah. I saw a lot of episodes from the Great War about Australia, Poland, Russia. Also about it's very interesting. I mean, they started a new channel called Between the Wars and World War II.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Shit, I gotta check
that out. Same guy.
Yeah, Indy Nidell.
Yeah, you even have a German version.
Yeah.
Indy Nidell doesn't say it, but because he can't speak German, but there's a German guy saying the same thing.
Damn, I gotta check that out again. I watched all of it a long time ago, and I need to check it out again.
Yeah, it's really good. Actually, in World War One, I found the general whose name he basically is one of the most responsible guys for the war. Basically, he started one of this. He's an Austrian guy, I think. That his name is Konrad von Hotzendorf.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what this kind of sounds like in German?
What?
Fotzendorf.
What does that
It
mean?
means cunt. Fotzen is cunt. Fotze, Dorf. Dorf means village. Cunt village.
Conrad von Cunt.
Cunt village.
Alright.
It's so fun.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Conrad von Cuntendorf. Alright, man. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Matt. Really appreciate it. Hope to have you on again in the future sometime.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Been another episode of Bullshit and Video Games. Go ahead and do all that good stuff down below. Comment, subscribe, give it a like, share it, or, just or do none of the above and just watch the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Man I am, ain't the man I dreamed I would be. Mountains rise so